And so I think you start there with expectation, and then you start building, okay, so how would Jesus respond to this? I told him the other night, I said, what could possibly be said to you on a court that would be worse than something that was said to Jesus? And I said, in all the things that he went through on his way to the cross and his ministry on earth, and the way he was treated and spoken to, I said, did you ever see him lose his composure? Well, no. I said, so why are we going to let something somebody says on the court make us go just nuts, or something from the stands or whatever? It's like tough, biblically tough athletes don't lose their composure, and they don't stray from the game plan because the other team does something to try to take them out of it. Because Jesus never got taken out of his plan, even when he even wanted to at times, right? And sometimes we do, but like you said, he was faithful, and he was the model of obedience for us to follow. And sports is great because you can be obedient to the game plan, and there's a lot of freedom within the plan. But if you stray out of it, bad things happen, and that's what a great lesson to learn. And Jesus never strayed out of the game plan.
You're listening to the Identity Sports Podcast, where we dive into the world of faith, sports, and inspiration with athletes from across the country. I'm your host, Zach Vogel. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Identity Sports Podcast. I'm here today with Paul Clark. He is currently at Scottsdale Christian Academy here in Phoenix. He spent over about 40 years coaching and working in different development and with kids of all ages. And so now he's currently finding himself as a director of faculty, and he's the men's basketball coach at Scottsdale Christian Academy. So our first basketball affiliate here. So Paul, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And so Paul and I, it's funny because there's so much off the recording that it's like, man, this is good. I need to try and throw this in there. We were kind of thinking, what is something as athletes that really kind of, is not true? And, as Christian athletes, there's this whole thing that like a Christian athlete is soft. And as competitors, and you look at some of the best athletes, you can't define a good athlete as soft. And so we want to dive in today on how we can attack that head on and really live and talk through what it looks like to be a Christian athlete on and off the field. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, a little bit about Paul. Tell us about how you even got into this role here at SCA now.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So I've been in education this is my 33rd year, 16 years in San Diego, and then now this is my 17th year at SCA. Came over as an English teacher, high school English teacher, did that for 29. Actually, I'm teaching one class this year, so I guess 30 years now teaching high school English. When I initially came to SCA, I was the girls varsity basketball coach for 7 years. And then I've been in the boys program for the last 10 years as an assistant for 9, and now as head coach. So throughout my time, 3 years ago, I guess 4 years ago now, I had the opportunity to become the middle school principal at SCA. Really enjoyed that role. I learned a ton. Loved the kids, loved the teachers, loved the people I was working with in leadership. Our superintendent is just like top notch. Dr. Brent Hodges has been a joy to work with, and I've learned so much from him. And they proposed a new position to me last year that we had been talking about in admin for a couple of years, of a director of faculty and staff development. And so they said, we were talking about it, and I said, hey, are you going to finally pull the trigger on that position? And they said, yeah. And they said, tell us what you think about this, but we think you might be the guy to do it. And I was like, oh, hadn't really thought about it, but sounds like a cool gig. And so we kind of fleshed it out and prayed about it, talked to my wife about it, and just seemed like just the perfect opportunity for the things I've learned and the experiences I've had. So I'm enjoying it. I support, coach, and mentor all of our employees from pre-K through 12th grade and all the staff. And it's been really fun. It's very busy. I'm in everything from, I can be in a preschool class to an honors, science class in the same day. And just talking to teachers, helping them get better. encouraging them. And basically, I just get up every day and I just try to serve however I can. And it's been awesome. I love it. It's like I keep telling them, I was like, man, I have the best job on campus. So God's been really good in that respect.
Yeah, you're fluid. I mean, you start your day in a preschool class, and
Yeah,
then you're
right.
walking around with high schoolers, and then
Hmm.
coaching men's basketball.
Yeah, it's like I see it all. I see it all.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, in that role of just staff development, I mean, what are some of the things you see? What are some of the things you guys are working through to develop these guys as leaders? I mean, do you get the same groups? I mean, do you literally have a preschool teacher and a high school teacher in the same group? How do you keep that the same when there's so many different levels of where their kids are at?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's such a unique environment to have all those kids under one roof, right? But basically three separate schools, right? And so one of the things that I've been working on this year is we developed a mentorship program for any teacher that comes on our campus, teacher or staff, who's first through third year. And so my first and second year guys, I meet with them every month. Um, they also have a grade level mentor that they meet with in their individual schools. And so we just try to provide as much support as we can. I would say that the biggest strength of SCA is the community aspect of it. It's such a great place. It's hard to describe it. Um, but we really like one of the things, because one of my parts of my job is to continue to build the culture amongst the faculty and staff. And I really try to build a culture of collegiality where we're all rooting for each other. And I always tell people, I said, hey, no matter what, whichever one of us anybody deals with, whether it's a teacher, a coach, an administrator, a janitor, whoever it is at SCA, I hope they walk away thinking like, man, everything they do at this school starts with Jesus and ends with Jesus. And so that I just beat that drum every day. And I go into classrooms and yeah, I could be meeting with, like yesterday, it was a third grade teacher, a sixth grade science teacher. Tomorrow it's a newer teacher, but she's 28 years into the game. So my conversations with her will be a lot different than my young guys. But it's really cool. And I had a mentor program when I was a young teacher that had a profound impact on my career. So to be in the position now to repay that it's super cool. It's super humbling. And I feel super old that I'm at that position right now in my career, but I absolutely love it. And we have just the best people to work with. So it's a really, really cool gig. So God's just continued to bless me over my career.
Yeah. Yeah. And so now you're back into coaching high school basketball. You're with the men this year. What is one of the things I know you had talked about, just the I am statements in John? What are some of the things that you're working in the development just with high school boys right now?
Yeah. So with our team, we've been doing a Bible study, basically going through the seven I am statements that Jesus makes in the Gospel of John. I had them read the book of John this summer, and we did a kind of workout, physical, mental, spiritual challenge this summer. And one of the things was read through the book of John, drop in the group chat any questions you have, observations you have as you read. And so that was pretty cool to kind of follow that as they read this summer. And so I did that because I had just done a really exhaustive series with my church in San Diego online. I spent 51 weeks in John and basically talking about how the book of John is really about what you do with Jesus is a life or death decision, right? And so it's like the question is, okay, who is he? And then once you know who he is, now what? Does that affect how you live? And so God kept putting that on my heart this summer, like, okay, where do you want me to take these guys? And he's like, let's go right back to the core. Let's really flesh out, okay, so there's that passage in Matthew where Jesus asks the disciples, says, hey, what are they saying about me? Who do they say I am? What's the word on the street? Well, you're like a good teacher, you're a prophet. Some of them think you might be the Messiah, right? And so then he flips it on them and he says, hey, so who do you say that I am? And so then they go around, whatever. And I said, so that question wasn't just to those 12, that's to us. And so we're kind of fleshing that out and we're going through like, okay, what did he mean when he said he was the bread of life? How does that affect me as, high school sophomore, junior in 2025? And what do I do with that as a basketball player? And then more importantly, what do I do with it after I'm done with basketball? So we've been going through just each statement one at a time. And it's been really, really good discussion. And told the guys last night after our game, I said, God is clearly doing something with this group, both with the individuals and the collective group. And as coaches, man, it is the best to just be in those conversations. We always say there's no judgment when we have those. There's no agenda on our part. We just want to talk about Jesus so that you guys are wrestling with this, because we really do think it is a life or death situation that we're posed with. So it's such a cool opportunity. It's opportunity every day, and to watch them wrestle with it and kind of help them navigate it. It's a pleasure and a blessing to be able to do that.
Yeah. And you can't attack it. You can't attack what you can't define. And so being able to define yourself as a player, that team is going to gel a lot better because each person knows their role. There's that sense of ownership of, hey, I've got this. And then you build the team around those guys so they're all complementary of each other. But I love that you guys are starting with the I am statements of not just who maybe you are as a person, but who is Jesus, and diving into those things. And one of the things that we hear often, on the show and from, listeners is, what does it look like to be a Christian athlete? But then you get to the stereotype of Christian athletes are soft. And, then you kind of say, okay, here's the question, but where did that even come from? I mean, what started that? You look at some people in the Bible and they're like the Old Testament's nuts. I mean,
Right.
no one in the Old Testament is soft. And so how did we let the enemy somehow get in our mind and let them define us as soft?
Yeah, I think we were talking about that before we started, and I think it's like you have like all these different pictures of Jesus, in Scripture, and we tend to be like, I kind of compare it to like the grace and truth principle, where a lot of people lean heavy one way or the other, and it's hard to find that sweet spot between the two. And you have to have both, but we have a tendency to be more grace based or more, justice based. And I think the same can hold true with your perceptions of Jesus. If you see him as the lion, right? You see him riding in on the horse in Revelation with King of Kings tattooed on his thigh. That's one Jesus. But then you can also see him as the shepherd of the lamb, right? And he's holding a little baby lamb and he's kind of mushy gushy, it's like kind of this soft perception of him. And so I think a lot of people default to that kind of image of Christ. And we forget that that's only part of his personality. And so I think it's really, and I think that all facets of his personality, they all fit in with toughness, with biblical toughness. And you just have to flesh out how they do that with kids and with parents and with coaches and whoever you're working with.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me of, this is a little off topic, but the movie Talladega Nights with Ricky Bobby, where they're having dinner and they're talking the conversation. Like, I like to picture my Jesus as 6 pound, 8 pound or 8 ounce baby Jesus lying there in a manger. So you're right. People have these different how they picture Jesus. And you kind of tackle, okay, is the way you picture Jesus, is it biblical? Is it the way that he's portrayed in the Bible? Because sometimes people like to put Jesus in their own little box and say, Jesus is who I need him to be at the time that I need it. And there's sometimes you get stray from that, and it's there's things where it's not biblical. And so you're going through that and you're trying to attack the question of our Christian athletes soft. And so what is like a revelation that you've seen from some of those guys teaching that, where you feel like it starts to click with one of the kids on the team?
Yeah, I think, what really started to get their attention is when the first Devo that we did in the series, I talked about just the whole concept of who is Jesus, who did he say he was. And we talked about our faith, and we talked about like there's three levels of faith. Like there's a believing faith, right, where I come into like the reality of, hey, there is a God, he is real. I have a problem that keeps me from him and I need him to fix that, right? So I believe that. And I was telling the guys, like, I lived in that stage of faith for a long time. And when I was their age, I consider myself to be a Christian poser. I'm a pastor's kid. I grew up in the church. I was my dad's first baptism, the whole thing. And it's like, so I could give the Christian people the Christianese and whatever they wanted to hear, but then I could go to the next group and blend in with them. I felt like a chameleon, but it wasn't like I wasn't standing for my faith. I was just like standing with whatever the crowd
Yeah.
was. And so we talked about, so it can go from believing and then it tends to go to a temporal faith where now it becomes this transactional relationship. Like, God, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you. Or if I do this for you, you do this for me. So I fell into that trap as well. And I said a lot of time in high school, my relationship with God was transactional. What can I get out of it? I said, but then at some point it hit me. The third level is what I call the surrendering faith. And so when you get to level 3, you give up your agenda for God's agenda. And I told him, I said, when I finally got there, game changer, everything changed. And it was no longer like a chore to go in the Bible. It's like, I need to go in the Bible. I desire to go in the Bible. And I had a kid, and he had said, you know what, Coach, I don't ever feel like I hear God's voice. I don't ever hear him talking to me. And so I don't know what he wants me to do. And I said, you know what, I used to feel the same way. I'd pray, and I wouldn't get an answer. And I said, what I didn't know, what I wasn't doing is I wasn't in the Word regularly. I wasn't listening to the people in my life that were telling me what God wanted me to hear. And so he was speaking. It wasn't him. It was always me. And they started to kind of perk up like, that happened to you? And so we had this kind of like connection of, okay, so he's not preaching at me. He's telling me like I'm normal. And that's really set the tone for the buy-in and I think just them allowing us to make them think. And, that's what I do as a teacher is I want you to read things, think about them, and then form what you feel after you've done that. And so we're just trying to do the same thing with the kids and the basketball team. And so far it's been really, really good, really well received. And, I tell teachers all the time, they'll be frustrated. It's like, oh, they don't listen. Kids are whatever. And I said, look, what do you control in our situation in the classroom? What do you control? You can't control what's coming in the door, but you can control if you're going to throw seed at that every day, right? And some of it's going to stick and it's going to grow and you're going to be really happy with that kid. Others, it's going to produce weeds and you're going to be like, and others going to bounce right back off and probably hit you in the eye. But what are you going to do tomorrow? Are you going to continue to throw seed? Or are you going to get frustrated and talk yourself out of it? You throw it every day and you let God deal with it. And so that's what that's what we try to do with our kids in the basketball and actually all aspects of our school. It's like we want everything we do, like I said, to start and end with Jesus. And he's got to be the center of your academics, your extracurriculars, your social, whatever it is you're doing, he's in the middle of it. So it's no different when you're talking about competition. If he's not in the middle of your competition, you're doing it wrong as a Christian, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want to be good stewards of what God has given us. Just because we say these prayers or we dive into a relationship doesn't mean we're going to be the best athlete on the field always, but we're going to work and strive to be the best athlete that we can be and who God has created us to be. What are some of there's a lot of wisdom that you're sharing. Obviously, the kids recognizing that, hey, he's a real person. I'm assuming some of these truths when you were 16 may not have been there yet. What were some of the personal development or books you've read that have kind of led you into that mindset that you can now pass on to those kids?
So I went to 2 high schools. I went to a public school for my first 3 years, played for a non-Christian coach who was very critical, very negative, who I'm sure thought he was teaching us how to be tough. Did not get the desired results with my teammates or myself as I'm old enough to kind of look back on it now. Ended up transferring to Santa Fe Christian in Solana Beach, California, my senior year. Played for a coach named Mark Mackay, and a polar opposite experience of my first 3 years. And the first day on campus, he made me a captain. And he said, every Monday morning at 6 a.m., you're going to be at Denny's in Del Mar with this book by Wes Neal. Okay, it was called Total Release Training Camp. So we went, there was, I think, 4 of us who were captains, and we met every Monday and we'd go through a chapter at a time of this Wes Neal book. And at the time, I was like, I was new to the school, and I was like, man, I don't want to come in here and like, how am I a captain? You don't even know me. It's like all of a sudden, it's like I see leadership potential in you, and I'm sure like that was probably the first adult that had voiced that to me, other than my parents. And I didn't get it at the time, and I didn't understand it, but I went every Monday, and I started. That was my basically my start with competing biblically. This whole concept was from Coach Mackay. I've never been around a more solid, what I would say, model of competing biblically than Coach Mackay. We still FaceTime. He's been a mentor of mine for like 40 years now, and that got me on the path. And so now, like I tell my kids, I said, you don't know why you're here right now. I had no clue why my coach was having me go through all this stuff. But it was God was setting me up to now I'm doing that for other kids. That blows my mind, because as a kid, I never saw myself being a teacher, being a coach, talking about, helping kids biblically with athletics. But he started it. He planted the seed. Actually, he was second. My dad planted the seeds. My dad was awesome.
Sometimes it takes a little more than someone in the family to get things
right
to go through.
Well, and we talked about that the other day, and I said, how many of you guys are like, don't really want to hear what your parents say right now?
Yeah.
And they're like, and I'm like, I didn't either when I was your age. And I know my dad and my mom were telling me everything I needed to hear, but if Coach Mackay said it, I'd go home and tell them, and they said, that's what we tell you every day, right? And it's like, I just didn't want to hear it. And I said, if you're in that space, thank you for being normal. And you could just see them like, okay, this we can be real here.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're trying to give them a space where it's safe and they're free to say there's nothing that's going to be judged that comes out of their mouth. And when you get them in that space, then you see growth, and you can literally see the wheels turning in their heads, even the ones that aren't talking. So as far as like my development, Coach Mackay is the guy that really he got me to hear what my parents were trying to get me to hear. So for that, I'll be eternally grateful. Then I went to, once I got hired, I've always been around just unbelievable Jesus guys to mentor me and to learn from. And I got hired from my first coaching job by a guy named Jeff Reinke. And Jeff, he was a guy that he played baseball and basketball at USC, pitched in the seventh. I think he beat Dave Winfield in Game 7 or the final game of the College World Series. Just a stud. I mean, he was a stud athlete. Grew up with Paul and Bill Westfall in the same neighborhood in Pasadena. Went to high school with them. And so he got me connected with a camp out here, Westfall Brothers Camp up in Prescott. So I took kids from San Diego out here for 6 or 7 summers and went to that camp. Through that camp, I met Bob Fredericks at SCA, who's a legend out here, retired now from coaching. I knew the Westfall brothers from other camps when I was a kid. Met a bunch of coaches out here. And I met one player, John Anderson, whose parents own the campsite where we had the camp. And now his kids go to SCA. He was in SCA, played for Bob. And then I coached with John the last 9 years. So all these kind of parts were moving, 33 years ago now, to the point where each one of those people has been part of my journey to get me to where God has me now. And so I'm super thankful for each one of them. They all taught me, either directly or indirectly, what it looks like to be biblically tough. Starting with Jeff, and then the Westfall experience with those guys. And then I had another coach that came in after Jeff stepped down. His name was Randy Wright, one of the best high school coaches I've ever known. One of the best Jesus guys I've ever known. Just really watching how he discipled his kids, watching the standards that he held those kids to was gold for me at that part of my career. I was fortunate to coach his daughter for all 4 years of high school. And she was one of the best competitors I've ever had, coaching, especially from a if we're talking about biblical toughness, this kid had it as a freshman. Um, and now she's the associate head coach of the volleyball team at Oregon State University. And so she and I, we've maintained a relationship all through her coaching career, and we always talk coaching and how things are going in each of our programs. And it's been really, really fun to watch her grow as a coach and continue to, in a public environment, really model like, hey, this is how Christians compete, because she's no joke, and she's the best person. She is just awesome, but she is no joke when it comes to competing. And so she's been part of my journey.
Yeah.
So I've just had all these great people, and
Yeah.
I try to soak in and be a sponge from everybody. And so I have this like broad perspective, and honestly, I just try to keep up with them. I don't feel like I bring much to the party, but I've stolen and I've taken a lot of things, and God's used them, put me in situations that I couldn't have imagined on my own.
Yeah.
So it's been really cool.
And I love how it all started. You can pinpoint it back to one coach that got the ball rolling for you. And just as you were mentioning, like, just you're throwing seed every day. Some will stick, some will bounce off, but you can see where some of that started to stick in your life and starts to snowball to where now you look back and you're like, man, I'm so thankful for, the injuries, the hard lessons, and all those things that came along the way. But you mentioned some other coaches, the volleyball coach at Oregon State and stuff. And I know you had some feedback from them too, but like, if we were to say, okay, what is a Christian athlete? Define that for us.
So, yeah, I reached out to several people that I respect just through the question. I'd say, what do you think? And there's a bunch of overlap for sure. But we have some common things that we teach. And it's like, if you're a Christian athlete or you're on a Christian school, I'll take SCA for an example. Our jerseys just say Christian. They don't say Scottsdale Christian, they just say Christian. And so we always talk about, hey, every time we play, we put that on, we have to represent that brand appropriately, right? That's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
And I told him last night, we had the shooting shirts on, and I said, look at what's on your chest right now before you go out. It's all caps. It's like Yahweh God here we're talking about, right? This is it. So that's got to affect the way that we play. And so we start there. And as a team, if that's on your jersey, you should be the toughest team to beat, right? And there's another coach I really respect over in San Diego, who we talk culture development, things like that a lot, and we talk competing biblically. And it's like, his take is like, you should play harder, you should work harder in the off season, you should be the most skilled guy you can be, and you should be the best teammate you can be if you have that on your chest. And he made a comment to me, and he said that Christian schools should not be okay getting beaten badly, and they should not be arrogant when they dominate. And that is so true. And that's kind of been my philosophy, coaching girls or boys. It's like, hey, it's disrespectful to your opponent if you don't give them your best. And if they don't give us their best, I feel disrespected. So that's kind of the standard I try to get my kids to. And it's not this like ego-driven thing. It's because I'll always ask them like, hey, did Jesus give his best for you? Yeah. How so? Well, he went to the cross. I'm like, yeah. I said, so if he gave his best for us on the cross and he endured all of that to take care of our sin problem, who are we to not give him our absolute best in competition? And they're like, huh.
And as simple as a basketball game.
Yeah. And I said, and I asked him the other day, I asked my guys, I said, hey, we have 13 guys on this team. We have 3 managers and 5 coaches, okay? So if my math is right, which it's usually not, I said, that's 21 of us, right? I said, can 21 guys, can God use us to make a difference, not only on this campus, but in the valley as we travel around playing basketball, playing this game that we love? And they're like, yeah, he can. I said, so will we let him? So that's our choice. We can control that if we want to allow God to work through us, but we have to be working. We have to be connected to him, right? And we're leading to the vine, which is, I can't wait to get to the branch and the vine part. But So we just talk about all the time, like, so knowing what we know, who am I to not play or study or act in a way that reflects good on him? And that's where it starts. And he's the model. And that's the thing, like we talked about, how you perceive Jesus really is the biggest factor too, if you understand competing biblically and I think biblical toughness.
Yeah, and I believe it's a book by John Bevere, The Awe of God.
Mm-hmm.
And it talks about what a fear of the Lord looks like. And it kind of breaks down the stereotype of what you mentioned earlier. You know, some people picture Jesus as like, you know, he's holding the lamb or he's like the infant baby Jesus. And like, there's so much more to who he is and how he lived his life. And, you know, there needs to be that healthy fear of God. Just as you mentioned, like, who is Jesus like? The revelation, like in Revelation, he's not a guy you want to mess
No.
with. Like it's intense stuff. And so we need to also be able to see Jesus in that light and even carrying the cross. And he knew ahead of time from day one what was going to happen at the end of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, he had some intense prayers and stuff, but he never backed down off of it. His prayers were still, God, if this is your will, you know,
Mm-hmm.
he's going to do it. Or if it's not your will, take it away from me. It wasn't just, you know, please, I don't want to go through this.
Yeah.
He was conscious of what God's will was in and through and out. And that's what we can do competing. And you can tell those guys, you can tell, you know, even for, you know, my daily life, I can tell at the end of the day those times where I started with a devotional versus days where I skipped over it because I was too lazy or I got too busy in the morning. And you can tell just the way you live your life, you know, if you're in tune with the Spirit and what God is doing. And so you're basically teaching and cultivating Spirit-led athletes. So on the court, you know, just how we're saying that, you know, God knew in certain moments what that person needed. He knew if they needed a gentle hand up or if he knew if they needed, you know, some you know, tough love. And that's how we can be on the court. You know, if someone's down, you know, you get that sense of, okay, yeah, at this time he needs me to pick him up or give a competitor, you know, hey, you know, good shot or something like that. Doesn't mean you have to be holding hands at the end of the game, but you're going to respect him by helping him up when it calls for it, but also knocking him down when it calls for it. You know, and you know, if you're playing football, you're not going to hit a guy soft. You're going to hit him as hard as you can within the rules of the game, and that's that respect aspect.
Yep. Yeah, all the attributes of Jesus matter. And especially as a coach, right? You're always looking for what's the right button with this kid. How do I motivate this kid? And sometimes it's different, right? Because they're all over the place emotionally at that age. And so it's like you have to read the room constantly and you have to be in tune with however God speaks to you, right? And it's usually through scripture, it's through the Holy Spirit, or it's through others, right? And I keep telling the kids, it's like if you do two of those three, you're not going to hear them as well. If you do one, it's going to be less. If you do all three, at least I tell them in my experience, you can't help but hear them. And that's a great place to be. And it doesn't mean it makes it easy because it's all on his timing, right? It's like, so sometimes you might know the issue the kid's dealing with, but you don't know the timeline it's going to take him to work through it. And I think one of the things that is interesting, I tell my kids all the time, it's like, I can teach you a lot about basketball and I can teach you a lot about, you know, what I've learned about the Bible and what God wants for us. I said, but if you're going through like a tough time, like a valley right now, the thing I can't teach you is perspective. It's like I can help you get through that valley so that once you get through it, you'll understand what I've been talking about. But perspective is only gained through going through it. And I think that's like competition. It's like sometimes, you know, I have a really young team right now. And sometimes we're playing like these guys that are seniors and juniors, and they've been playing 2 or 3 years on varsity, and they've just gone through it more. Their perspective's a lot different than my guys. And so we've been learning a lot of lessons through the ups and downs of having a young team. And so, and I think that's life, right? So sports is great because you can have those conversations over something really, you know, in the grand scheme, it's so meaningless as just, you know, a game. And what a privilege that is, right? But if we're going to play the game, and I tell them all the time, I said, hey, if they're going to keep score, I'm going to try to win.
Mm.
If I don't care about winning, I'll go down to the Y and we'll play pickup and we'll have fun. But if they're going to put a score on it, I'm going to do everything I can to win within the rules of the game, within the way it's supposed to be played. But if you're not trying to win, go to the rec center. That's okay. That's a great place to be. But if you're here, we're investing a lot of time and a lot of energy to see how good we can be. What's our ceiling as a group? And if you want to be a part of that, let's go. But if you don't, man, let's not waste anybody's time, and let's get you in the right spot, right? And so I think you start there with expectation, and then you start building, okay, so how would Jesus respond to this? I told him the other night, I said, what could possibly be said to you on a court that would be worse than something that was said to Jesus? And I said, in all the things that he went through on his way to the cross and his ministry on earth, and the way he was treated and spoken to, I said, did you ever see him lose his composure? Well, no. I said, so why are we going to let something somebody says on the court make us go just nuts, or something from the stands or whatever? It's like biblically tough athletes don't lose their composure, and they don't stray from the game plan because the other team does something to try to take them out of it. Because Jesus never got taken out of his plan, even when he even wanted to at times, right? And sometimes we do, but like you said, he was faithful, and he was the model of obedience for us to follow. And sports is great because you can be obedient to the game plan, and there's a lot of freedom within the plan. But if you stray out of it, bad things happen, and that's what a great lesson to learn. And Jesus never strayed out of the game plan. And I think to me, that's the starting point. Then you can get into like some of the people we read about in the Bible. And some of those were mentioned by people I talked with as I was thinking about this. I mean, you look at David. Was he soft? How is he described? He's a man after God's own heart, right? Mm-hmm. And there's like a verse in Acts, I think it's Acts 13:22, and it says he was a man after God's own heart who will do everything I want him to do. And so to me, it's like part of being biblically tough is, are you willing to do what you're asked to do on the court and not waver? And that's a biblical principle, because if you can do it in a basketball game, there's a way better chance you're going to do it in life. Yeah. So what a privilege to be able to have that conversation with a 16-year-old.
Yeah. There's that accountability there too. And, I just love reading about David and talking through David's life too, because sometimes you get the connotation that shepherds are soft, mm-hmm. but then you read through of like what a biblical shepherd went through. I mean, they're fighting off bears and wolves and by themselves with a staff. Like now, like it's almost like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Like it doesn't make sense. And you're trying to beat off a bear with a staff and those things. And so, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And it's so fascinating to hear these things. And you see that difference in, coaching now. Yep. And you think back on like, when I was going to school and other people are going to school, you even mentioned a coach that did it to where it was just almost like verbal abuse, or like he thought he was building you up in toughness, but maybe they were teaching you to act out, or to like, almost like that bully mentality. And so it's fun to see that dynamic shift, the mental health stuff that's now being taken into account, and how to develop people, not just as an athlete, but as a human being. I mean, these boys, they're going to be husbands, fathers, mm-hmm. How can you throw seed in their life at the high school level? It may not stick with them there, but as they're down the road, I mean, things start to click with them. And so it's just so cool to see that. And, what do you think as, athletes when they're going through that, what do you feel like has been one of the biggest contributions to that shift in coaching?
So I think for us, we really emphasize. So I had a kid, he's a young kid, and he's made leaps and bounds this year. And he told me one time, he said, Coach, I play my best when I'm angry. I said, yeah, I used to believe that too. That used to be me. You say something to me, I'm going to shut you up, right? And I said, in all honesty, that's fool's gold. And a lot of people buy into that myth that if I'm angry, I'm gonna be at my best. And what we teach is joy mindset, and we try to cultivate as much joy as possible to help us get through whatever adversity happens in the game. And our joy mindset is we start Jesus first, we put others second, and then we take care of ourselves last. And if you operate out of that mindset, man, it's like you can handle so much more and keep your poise. And this kid that had mentioned that to me, he has come so far in shifting from an anger mindset to a joy mindset. I love watching this kid play. I mean, he's passionate, he competes, he's smart, he's a team guy. I love the shift and the growth I've seen in him, and I've seen it in all of our kids. Just it's always at different paces, different things, but he sticks out to me as an example of kind of the mindset that we start with. It's never like it's very intense. I have very high standards for our kids, but it's always coming from a place of, hey, I'm trying to see, like I said, like what's your individual ceiling and what's this group ceiling, because we have 1 year with this group, and I'm very curious to see how close can we get to the ceiling. And everybody, I think they perceive their ceiling at a certain place, and as a coach, I can get you past your perceptions. And so I tell like our best players, I have one kid, he's phenomenal, just scored over 1,000 points as a sophomore.
Wow.
And I tell him all the time, I said, are you elevating your teammates' ceiling by the way that you're leading, the things they hear from you? And so we just challenge our guys. Like, you got to make it about you, but what you're doing ultimately has to be about your teammates. And even beyond that, are you making God look good? I heard a pastor say that phrase in a sermon a long time ago, make God look good. And that has stuck. That's become like a life phrase for me. And it's like we talk about it. It's on every scout. It's our last key to the game, is to make God look good. And so we're always saying, hey, is what you're doing and how you're doing, is it making him look good? If it is, let's keep it rolling. If it's not, let's reevaluate and let's try to get back to that place. And that comes from, how can you get to play this great game, who God's given you the abilities and the desire to do it, and not have joy?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like I didn't play out of joy for a long time.
Yeah. There's so many pressures we put on ourselves.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Jesus never puts that pressure on you. You know what I mean? It's like, and anytime, like, sometimes a kid will feel like, the guilt and shame, the enemy will hit them with guilt and shame. I'm like, that's not coming from God. He's not judging you. That's a lie.
Yeah.
I will often refer them to, that book, Winning the War in Your Mind by Craig Rochelle. And just like, hey, anytime you start hearing things that you're not this or you're no good or blah, 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 that's the enemy. Mm-hmm. And you've got to get back to the word and replace his lies with the truth, because that's his game. He's the father of all lies. And so when you start to hear that, that's not what God thinks of you or how he sees you. So you've got to get back to the truth. Now it's your choice. Will you go there or not? Or will you stay in your head?
Yeah.
I used to stay in my head when I was your age. Didn't work out very well for me. Now that I go here, game changer. And all you got to do is, like, I can't do it for you, but I want to make it so you'll give it a shot. Because I know if you give this a shot, it won't disappoint. And so that's the whole gig, right? It's like trying just for anybody, because everybody would be so quick to tell you why it's what a waste of your time. What are you doing? Have you ever even looked into it? And most of them haven't. And so you got to make it comfortable where, hey man, no judgment, but just check it out.
Yeah.
Let it be an option. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And so that's, as coaches, we get kind of geeked out to have those conversations. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're, right between the eyes, they're pretty direct, and kids struggle with it, but they'll always come back and say, hey, thanks for caring,
Yeah.
And it's like, that's all we really try to do, is just care every day. And, I always say, like, all the best cultures are built on care, and kids know if you do or don't, and you can't fake it. And I think that's where you start. They have to believe you care. Otherwise, in their mind, why should I care if you don't care about me? And so that's a constant, like, intentional thing we try to do, is really, how are we showing as coaches that we care about them, whatever their role is on the team right now.
Yeah.
So, and I think that goes a long way too, because once kids, and I found this to be really true with girls, when girls believe you care about them, they will literally run through a brick wall for you. The second they think you don't care, walls go up, and it's really hard to get them back. So you have to constantly be reminded, like, hey, why am I pushing you so hard? Why am I saying it like this? It's because I know you're better than that. And once they believe that, man, you can coach them as hard as you want and they will respond. And it's super fun to watch.
Yeah, you're just developing character
Absolutely.
and growing and helping them grow. And it reminded me of our good friend Randy Chambers. You know,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things he said to me when I was in college that still sticks with me is just the thermometer versus thermostat. You know,
Yeah.
when you walk in the room, are you rising or falling to the level of the room? Or when you walk in that room, are you the thermostat? Are you setting the pace? Are you setting the temperature of, if I'm in the room, this is where we're going to be at? And as Christ followers, we're supposed to be that thermostat, that we're going in and we want to be a light and we want to set that energy and that tone for how we should act as Christ followers. Um, so man, this has been inspiring. I mean, I'm I'm ready to run through a brick wall. I'm like, man, I want to go back and play some sports. I wish I could. I don't think I have any years left to eligibility, but I'm gonna see if I do. But no, so thank you for joining us today, Paul. And if there's kind of like a parting last
Mm.
thing that you feel like God's placed on your heart, what would you leave the listeners with today?
Yeah, I think I think it's hard to really wrap your head around like what God actually did for us. What did Jesus, I mean, what did he actually do for us? And when you start to understand, and this is really all I want my kids to do is just understand like who Jesus is and what he has to offer. And once you do, it's like as a coach, if we're talking about just a final point on biblical toughness, my friend Randy Wright, he said, when you look at the characters in the Bible, the people in the Bible and their stories, like whether you're looking at like David, we talked about, or like Job, who was like everybody's telling him to sell out God, and he's like, nope, I'm gonna follow him. I don't care what happens to me. That type of obedience is toughness, right? Doing the right thing when everybody's telling you not to. And to me, like the Apostle Paul and everything he went through and his backstory and how God just radically changed him. It's never too late. There's nothing you can do that you can't overcome with God. And then he goes and he gives us in Philippians 4:13 a verse that I think is taken out of context a lot. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I think it's like it should be said, I can endure all things that, you know, through Christ who strengthens me. And to me, that's toughness is endurance, right? And just stay in the course. And so my friend Randy said, so for all these stories in the Bible, you look at these people who God has called into his service, and if you ask the question, were they soft? You're going to say no, right? And so then you go, he's like, as a Christian coach, if God demanded excellence, why can't we? It's like, why can't we expect our kids to compete at the highest level mentally and physically and spiritually? Because that's what God expects, right? So why should we ever feel like that's wrong or that's not what Christians should do, right? And it's like, we should be the toughest. But toughness is a different thing for us than the rest of the world. And when you get to go out and show that to a gym full of people or stadium full of people, man, what God's going to do the work. You just have to do it the way he wants you to do it, and he'll take it from there. And so I would encourage any like athletes or coaches, man, get in the word, consistently stay in the word. You need to be in prayer. You need to be in constant communication with the Lord because he does want to know what you have to say. He does care. He does want to have conversation with you. And then you can't do the Christian thing alone. I always tell people there's no Lone Ranger Christians. You can't isolate and think you're good. And so you've got to be in community. You've got to have other people that are in this. It's a small percentage of teams and coaches doing it this way. So you need people to bounce things off. You need a Randy Chambers in your life. You need a Randy Wright. You need a Mark Mackay. These people that God's put in my life. And so if you're a young coach, you got to find that person right now. If you don't already have them, if you're an old coach and you don't have a young coach in your life, you got to go find that kid right now and you got to start discipling them. And that would be what I leave with everybody is if you're in it and you've seen the benefits of it, don't keep it to yourself. And let somebody else in on the secret because it's too good to keep to yourself.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Absolutely.
Hey, if you were encouraged by today's episode, let us know in the comments or send us a message. We'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts, or maybe how we can help you and pray for you in your pursuit of, being a Christian athlete or a Christian coach. Let me go ahead and pray for us, and then
Thank
we
you.
can shut this down. Dearly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you just for the chance to get here and talk about you and talk about sports together. I mean, those are some of our favorite things in this life that you've given us, God, and what it really means to truly follow you through sport. It's something as simple as a game that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and we take out of context of why you created sports in those games in the first place. But thank you for helping us realize, that it is just another tool that we can use to spread the gospel and to encourage others and teach us so much about life that we can pour into these kids and grow as people and fathers and mothers. And thank you for Paul and all that he's doing at SCA, God. And I pray that you'll just continue to bless them and bless that team and bless that school, God, and just continue to guide them in the way that they should go. And especially as, his basketball season is winding down, as, they're looking into maybe heading into the playoff season, that you will just encourage that team and give them the strength that they need to continue honoring you, no matter what how the results go. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Man.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
You're listening to the Identity Sports Podcast, where we dive into the world of faith, sports, and inspiration with athletes from across the country. I'm your host, Zach Vogel.